Welcome, everyone. 2026, our kickoff with John Taylor. So, what do you have for us today, John?
Hey Tammy, I want to talk about latency today, and it's going to start boring and statistical because that's kind of where latency comes from. But I think there's application for relationships for individuals, and especially in early recovery. So, kind of prime the pump for everybody. I want you to think about an issue, a fight, problem in your relationship or your individual life. One that recurs, one that doesn't seem to change from iteration to iteration. Um, maybe one that drives you really, really crazy. And start to think about, is there a pattern to this? Is there a predictability to this? Could I set my clock by this? Um, the entry points for both of us or for me, are they really similar? Um, just be thinking about the issues that you wish you could make a wave a magic wand and change. And I ask you to do that because I think that's how a lot of us approach change in the very beginning. Is this thing is intolerable? It can't keep going. I can't keep standing it, so it just has to go away. And which is very very understandable, especially when it's something as devastating as addiction or infidelity, or lots of strife, conflict, stress in a marriage. Um, I think that a lot of solutions, or I should say, our expectations of how a solution is going to work, they're incomplete and there's holes in the solution because we don't take into account the concept of latency. So, what latency is, I learned this when I was getting my bachelor's degree when I was a little baby social worker. And one of my professors, he gave us this acronym FLID. He said, anytime someone tells you about a behavior, a habit, an occurrence, you need to figure out FLID, which stands for frequency, latency, intensity, and duration. So if you imagine like a sine wave, like this, the up and down, and then you have zero in the middle or baseline in the middle. What frequency is the peak or the trough. How often does that come along? What intensity is how high above baseline, either positive or negative, does this go? Duration is how long between peak and trough. What's the length of time of this behavior? And then latency is what is the time between peak to peak? So, how much time do we have between the onset of the behavior, onset of the pattern? So I think early in recovery, we definitely like it's right there for us to look at the frequency, how often are you relapsing? How often do I have to worry that you're dishonest with me? The intensity, well, how bad is it? What are you doing? What are you not doing? And the duration, how long can I expect you to be in this altered state? And all of these descriptors, by the way, could describe betrayal trauma as well. Not that it's a behavior that we choose and act out on, but once that cycle gets kicked off, again, there's an intensity, there's a frequency, there's a latency, there's a duration. Latency, I think, is actually something that we may be motivated to not wrap our heads around in early recovery. So think about this. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I was newly graduated and I was doing adult therapy for the first time for myself. And I remember sitting in my therapist's office one day and I was sobbing. I was really discouraged. I was really sad. My therapist's name was Jim, and I said, Jim, I've worked on this before. Like I've resolved this. Like, why am I back
Mm.
here? And he chuckled in a supportive way and he said, oh, you think it's linear. You think you go from point A to point B. And he said, this kind of stuff is cyclical, it's orbital. And so he said, the thing that I'm concerned about is not, are you here again? Do you have to deal with this again? But are you at a different altitude? Are you different latitude? Do you see this differently at all? How is it going this time? So back then, Jim turned my attention to this latency phenomenon. And sometimes, especially, I see this phenomenon with the folks who struggle with addiction and trauma in long-term recovery. I see this phenomenon that there are things that aren't even on the radar for years and years and years, and then will pop up. And we actually see that phenomenon in like addiction to physical substances. Some substances, especially like THC, marijuana is one that is famous for this. The substance can be stored in the fatty tissue unmetabolized, and later on, through the course of things, you can have parts of that substance remetabolize, and it's almost like taking the drug again. It can initiate withdrawal symptoms that haven't been around for a long, long time, like physically stored in the body. I think in our minds, it's the same way. There can be phenomenon that do not rear their head. We don't have access to it. It's not pertinent. It's not fresh. That after years and years of good, solid recovery or long lengths of time of good, solid recovery, you can have things crop up almost as if it had never been metabolized, almost as if it had never been processed. It can be very surprising. So when we plan for this, like my conversation with my therapist, it changed how I thought about um, pain, trauma, struggle, and it changed how I interacted with the struggle right now. I think again, like I said earlier, if we aren't taking into account the phenomenon of latency in our change planning, then we think about from point A to point B, and often we think about cutting corners. How fast am I going to get from point A to point B? If there's anything along the way that is not a straight drive for point B, I'm just not paying attention to it, and I'm going. Now, for like acting out behaviors and self-harming behaviors, I think that's the way to go early on. You just have to get out. You just have to change. But if we're thinking about latency, we never really see ourselves as I've reached the promised land and there will never be another struggle. It's okay, I'm at a point of safety now. I'm glad that's not my everyday, but I still need to think about this. I still need to plan for this. I still need to look out for this because I know how behavior works. Humans are pattern, we're machines that crank out patterns. That's how we perceive, that's how we act. So when we're thinking about the phenomenon of latency, we're saying if it's happened in the past with frequency, I can assume that it's going to come up in some iteration in the future. Now, there may be some of you out there that are wanting to leave the meeting and turn off your camera and say, I think John's full of it, and that's fine. I'm not trying to preach doom and gloom. I'm trying to preach wisdom. Um, if you look at the sine wave, um, there is no 90-degree vertical on a sine wave. There's always a buildup. So when we think in terms of latency, and we think, the pinnacle of this behavior, the pinnacle of the acting out, the core of the trauma, there are behaviors, thoughts, and emotions that approach that. This is where, some of you who have worked with like the facing the shadows material, like the ball rolling down the hill thing. And it's that same idea, even in the buildup. There's predictable behaviors, there's ritualization, there's ways of thinking and feeling that are connected to this. They are not the same as the behavior themselves, but they're almost like, I don't know, the tea leaves, the drop in the barometer. Like these are the things that may start to clue me in that latent behavior, that latent struggle is starting to surface again. And in long-term recovery, we can take preventative action. I think it would be an exhausting way to live your recovery to every day take preventative action on everything that could happen, whether it's present or not. And I think that's one of the things that burns people out in recovery early on. Is it feels like I've got to eat the whole elephant or everything is a crisis. And in early recovery, like everything is a crisis. But as we go on in time and we gain wisdom in recovery, we learn to eat the elephant one bite at a time. We learn to deal with the gator closest to the boat. We learn to prioritize. We learn to live the serenity prayer. We do what we can and we surrender the rest. And again, I think this applies to betrayal trauma as well. You get to a place of utter visceral safety within a 6-month period just doesn't happen. I I have not seen that happen. I haven't even seen it happen in a 6 year period. Utter visceral safety. I don't have to worry again. I'll never have to deal with this again. So when we start to account for latency, I think that's part of how we grow up and mature with respect to the problems that we have. Gosh, I would really love, like, as I'm sobbing to my therapist, Jim, gosh, I would really love to never ever deal with this again. And he very lovingly, very compassionately, very firmly says, that's not a sane way to think. Like, stop that. Those of you that know that stop it sketch with Bob Newhart, stop it. Um, essentially, like you have to change your view and you just have to expect this. Um, so um, it's funny when I was writing this up, it was reminding me of our neighbor. We live next to this very sweet late 80s woman who, for the last 10 years, has been kind of an adopted grandma for our family. My two youngest love her, like they are her fan club. And summer after summer, I think from the minute we moved into the house, I told her I want to get rid of the grass in the front yard, and I want a zero-scape. I want something that's less work, less maintenance. Now, our dear sweet neighbor has a lot of opinions, and she's not shy about offering any of them. But she's also not direct. So, in her very passive, oh, no, no, don't do that. I think that's a terrible idea. She says, well, people who have rock in their front yard, they still have to weed and they still have to water. And she says, don't you think it's easier to just run a mower over everything and then it looks nice? Again, even in that, I think truth is spoken by several sources in our life. Even in that, my dear sweet pushy neighbor is saying you got to remember there's a latency. So yeah, maybe you don't have to attend to living plants and fertilize that, but you'll have a different kind of work to do. Now her motivation is to discourage me from changing the front yard because for whatever reason she doesn't want that. But you build it into the plan, and then when you have realistic expectations and it doesn't catch you off guard when, oh, there's that thing again or there's that inclination again. Even if it's, I've worked with people even recently where parts of their acting out history were not happening when they got caught, were not happening when they got into recovery. And for years were not even on the radar. It was a historical thing, and they were, speaking about it and dealing with it appropriately. Yes, I did that. I recognize why that's not a good idea. Here's my boundary plan. And you get a couple years into a solid recovery, and all of a sudden, you start seeing this latent behavior manifesting again. The good work in early recovery was looking at the whole map. What am I capable of? What's been the pattern? So there can be some denial to break through, some reorientation. Nope, this is it. It's real. But when we think with latency in mind, we're prone to less of that denial. No, 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 never could be. I haven't done that in years. This has to be something else. So here's how I think this applies to couples in recovery and how you can use this concept of latency even early on. So I think when we take into account latency, when it comes to behavior, habits, patterns, things like that, it's another layer of contending with who I really am and who you really are. Now, I think it's impossible to distinguish the core me before I was affected by anything and the me that changes as a result of learning, as a result of hard knocks, as a result of peace and safety, as a result of stress. Like we are fungible organisms. And so who we really are is not some picture of how it was in the past. There is no going backwards, there's only going forward. So when we think in terms of there are patterns and there are parts of me that may be long dormant, and I've got my fingers crossed that they're dead, but likely not because that's not how behavior works. So I can just expect, I can expect that there will be some iteration of this. So I see this a lot with addicts in early recovery, and I think it's a fantastic idea to get versed in the idea of multiple addictions. So it may not be acting out sexually that I'm drawn to. If I'm doing my recovery right, we would hope that that would happen. But what if I become obsessed with exercise, work, money, food, gambling? Like, again, there's that latency phenomenon. I can expect that this way my brain is wired is going to find a different route. And it's not so much just like with raising and disciplining toddlers, it's not about stopping, it's about redirecting. Oh, there's that compulsive part of me. I'm starting to fixate again on baseball scores. I can't put my phone down during baseball season. This feels a lot like my obsession and addiction. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get accountable. I'm going to set up some limits. I'm going to make plans for when I do engage with this, and I'm going to have some rituals for disconnecting and shifting gears. And I'm really going to work to keep this in balance. I also think for couples earlier in recovery, it shifts the focus from problem solving into resiliency. Now, I would say that resiliency is greater than problem solving. And I'm not saying that problem solving is garbage. I'm saying with your limited energy, with your limited time and effort, if you focus more on what makes you resilient, that is awareness, that is
Mhm.
decreasing denial, that's building recovery resources, that's having a social support network that can help you when you're in trouble. You are more likely to be able to handle well a myriad of issues than if you're just trying to solve one problem at a time. So it's the difference between a garage full of highly specialized tools that are uh, only useful for this one specific application versus some really good general basic tools and a knowledge of how to use them. So for couples and for individuals, putting the focus on how do we become resilient? We know life is going to do this. We know we are going to do this. We know our behavior is going to do this. How do we become able to ride those ups and downs without getting buried in the avalanche? Um, what can we deploy around ourselves that kind of keeps us more on the surface of this rather than getting overtaken and buried? Um, I've said this before in these webinars. One of the cornerstones of secure functioning is you have to be an expert in each other in a relationship. Now, I was just thinking about this morning as I was thinking through some of the sessions I have coming up today and some of the questions I need to ask. And, throughout the decade and a half plus of my career, on a regular basis, when my wife and I talk about my job, we'll say, I have such a weird job. Like, these are the types of questions I ask people. And sometimes the kinds of questions I have to ask, if I'm honest, there's a part of me that says, I don't want to ask that and I don't want to know. Like it brings stuff up for me. It's embarrassing. I know it's hard for someone else to talk about this. Like there's all sorts of reasons I want to stay away from it. But if you want to be an expert, if you know you must be an expert in your partner, you have to look at the good, bad, the ugly. You have to be able to touch it all. You don't have to like it, but you have to be able to touch it all. Otherwise, you can't predict this person. Otherwise, you can't really know this person, which is part of our job. Um, this expertise in each other also includes some basic knowledge about general human behavior. Again, frequency, intensity, length, duration. Um, so the challenge in early recovery is don't be lazy. Just because you're not struggling with betrayal trauma personally doesn't mean that that's not something you shouldn't know a ton about. So read up on it, learn how it manifests, learn how it stores in the body, learn how the brain works around trauma. That may not be a one-to-one comparison for your partner. You may not know everything about your partner, but you'll have enough knowledge that you can orient when everything has been peaceful for months and months and months and things seem to be going really, really well. And then your partner takes this nosedive and it feels like it did when it was D-Day all over again. If you know nothing about trauma, you look at your partner and say, what's wrong with you? If you know about betrayal trauma, you would think in terms of, okay, what anniversary is it? Are there triggers in the environment? Um, is this one of those latent things that metaphorically was stored in the fatty tissue and it's just up for metabolization now? Oh, here's what this is. This is about the past. So if we're not thinking in terms of latency and cycles, I see a lot of addicts think in terms of, well, yeah, I have to be sweet and empathetic and attentive now, but one day Again, it's like raising children. One day I'm not going to have to hold this kid's hand, tie their shoes, take them to the bathroom, like they'll be independent. And so we put on this really temporary veneer of attentiveness, empathy, connection, caring, and then day we decide, well, you've graduated, you're done with it. So, now we're back to ships passing in the night, and I don't have to take care of you as much, which would be an error. That would be a calculation that would be an error. So don't be lazy. Learn how change works, learn how trauma works, learn how addiction and recovery work. And keep in mind that if you're reading it in a book, it is not describing your partner one to one. It's just a place to start. So then you have conversations with your partner. I remember early on in my career, a man came into our clinic, had just been discovered with addiction, and he stayed up all night. It was one of the first books on partner trauma written, and I can't remember the name of it now, but he stayed up all night reading the entire book. And the next day, he said to his spouse, he had this list of questions. I had no idea. Is it like this for you? Is it like this for you? When this happens, what? And that list of questions, some of them he'd crossed out, okay, that's not relevant to my partner right now. But a lot of them were like, it's not that he took his eyes off the prize in his own recovery. It's like he broadened it. Yes, I have to worry about me and I have to know about what's going on with me. And I also have to know kind of how things work for this person that I'm connected to. Because what happens to one of us happens to both of us. Um, Latency shows up in all of those things: recovery, addiction, trauma, change. Um, if you take into account latency as well, you can decide your personal stance on latent behaviors. You can settle on it instead of saying, I was laughing with my 15-year-old the other day. Our two preschoolers, they have figured out all the latches on all the baby proof stuff that we've had. So we used to have some safe zones in our home. We don't anymore. So they were headed downstairs. I heard them unlatch the gate and they're headed downstairs, which is kind of an off limits area for them if they're not with somebody. And so they're headed down the stairs and I say, I'm going to count to 10. You two need to be up here before I get to 10. And I start counting and they turn right around and come out. And, they distracted themselves with some other toys. My 15-year-old says, what were you going to do when you got to 10? I said, I've never had to find out. I don't know. It's just the counting right now is enough. If you take into account latency, this is going to happen again, or it's possible it could happen again. You can decide what your reaction is going to be. You know what? That behavior is a deal breaker for me. And I can let you know right now, I don't have another one of those in me. So if that's something that you choose to do, if that's something that you're not going to be serious about, I've got my fingers crossed for you that you stay sober and you stay away from it. But should it happen again, I already know how I need to react. And you can settle yourself on that and you can prepare yourself for those. You can contend with things like, am I being selfish, saying I don't want to live with someone who struggles with an addiction? I don't want to be in a relationship where relapse is a probability, which it is for everyone in recovery. Now, again, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, but that's one of the realities of living with addiction. It is possible. Recovery puts a big, changes greatly the probability of relapse happening again, but if it's possible. And for some folks who have family members who are addicts or some betrayed spouses, some of them say, I don't have another relapse in me, and I'm finding it untenable to be in a relationship with someone where I know they've got to go to a meeting every week. I know they've got to work with a sponsor. I know they've got to go to therapy for probably the rest of their life. Um, if they're going to maintain sobriety, it's just too much for me. So it can be clarifying for you if you think in terms of those patterns and you can really look at, what does this mean for me? What do I want? You can grapple with some of that. Am I being selfish? Am I being unreasonable? Am I being realistic? You don't have to be at the precipice to decide all of that stuff. You don't have to have a gun to your head. You can think it through. You can also think through, what will my response be to relapse? And I think that can bring in a lot of panic for both addicts and their partners. Well, if this happens, is it the worst thing ever? Does it mean it's all over? Am I going to hide it? Can I stand this? Versus like when I think of addicts in recovery who are very clear on the fact that, like, my friend Carver Brown would say, I'm recovered, but I could get uncovered real quick. Um, when you think that way, how much easier is it to pick up your phone and call your sponsor or support people when there's signs of trouble versus I'm embarrassed, I'm here again, I'm embarrassed, I'm struggling again. So grappling with the fact that latency is a thing can help you prepare, it can help you make better plans. As I'm installing this new yard, I finally got to the point where my front yard is just dirt now. And in the spring, we'll, put in the rocks and the plants and things like that. Um, I'm doing research on things that I need to have in my garage. I need to have a pre-emergent that I put on the ground a couple times a year. I'm going to need different tools to weed because with rock mulch, I'm not going to get a big shovel like I do in the dirt and dig something up by the roots. I got to have something a little more tailored, a little more precise. The sprinkling system I'm going to put in is going to be different than what was there before because I'm expecting different issues that are going to be recurrent. You can plan your recovery accordingly. There's latency. This thing happens. It can happen. Um, if you're planning to firmly put all issues in the rearview mirror, you're going to be motivated to cut corners. This is where in AA, the wisdom we take it one day at a time, I think is really, really important. We take nothing for granted. You can have the most rock solid, admirable recovery program going, um, either from betrayal trauma or addiction, and it can rear up and bite you. Um, and again, if resiliency is better than solving the problem, if resiliency is going to get you more mileage than solving the problem, um, you can make plans for what's coming next. I'll close with one more story. One person that I worked with early on in his recovery, he gave the metaphor. He said, I was found on the side of the road, metaphorically beaten half to death, and luckily the world's best paramedics came along, took me to the world's best hospital, and I got to work with the world's best doctors. I got that early in my recovery, and it's been years since he's acted out. He's had a good solid recovery program, and stuff started to manifest. Thankfully, he knew his buildup well enough that it wasn't acting out behaviors, but it was emotional stuff. And he said, I was hoping I wasn't going to have to consider another inpatient stay, but I think that's what I'm going to need here. This is really overwhelming. And he had even planned for it. We have money set aside for this. I've been thinking there may come a time that I might have to go in for a tune up. And he did. And I wouldn't say that it was, no bumps in the road, but the damage was minimal. The setbacks were minimal because it didn't shock him. He didn't have to go into denial to deal with the fact that there's hard emotional stuff that I can't cope with right now. I'm in over my head, so I need help. So that is latency.
Latency and resiliency, really good stuff. I put, and you talked about Carver, saying, I'm recovered, but I could get uncovered, really quickly. I never use recovered. I like
Yeah.
I always say I'm in recovery, and that helps me to remind myself that this is a process. I'm never going to arrive, that there's no, there isn't an end to this. I love when you're talking about cyclical but orbital. Like I had this whole different vision of, because cyclical, I think of, the Ferris wheel, but orbital, I'm like, oh, wow, this stuff is, can be spinning, in all points all around, and so when, when do the planets align kind of thing, and so there will be moments. I liked when you're talking about that last example too, that he planned ahead and was aware, and wasn't under a false sense of like, oh, I'm all good, this will never happen again. Was going like something could come up, it could be big, and I'm going to make sure I'm taking care of it. We've both been around long enough to know that there's lots of people who don't do that, that get into the um I'm good, I can quit doing all of the things that help me along the way. And then it's almost, there's some that get to the point where it's like, I have too much pride. I've been doing this too long. I shouldn't need help. I think that's what I was trying to get to. And so therefore, I'm not going to lean into those basic resources. I've shared this before. Is like, COVID was horrible for me, and my really good therapist, suggested I had to be really intentional. And I thought, what worked for me for everything else, the basic foundational things that I learned in early recovery. I went right back to the very foundational things, used it on how I approached stuff with COVID, and that really helped me. So it's like one of those, I have my insurance policy that if I continue to do the things I need to do, I'm going to be okay. But I really like, stuff does come up, and like you say, it's not like, yeah, I'm really fine and then all of a sudden poof, it definitely, I go it's that curve, and you start to see, but we need to be aware, of what it is and have the expectation, there's, this stuff. And I love too what you're talking about with, becoming experts in each other, from a couple standpoint, and how, you don't want to ask the unfun questions, you don't want to know the answer. And I thought, wow, there's a lot of fear that can come up with that, of like, if I ask you, is your answer going to be one that I actually want to hear, or is this going to be, oh, painful, scary, whatever, but if we're like, I think that's the vulnerability that if we're in a real relationship, we want to build towards that ability to have that level of vulnerability. And like, I do want to know, like, even if you have something that isn't going to be pleasant for me to hear, it's about me, something, I often say every problem is an opportunity. And I use a lot of reframing with that, because then, like, it motivates me to not just go, oh, this is so horrible and hard. Like, what can I do? What measures can I take that will give me an opportunity to move forward? And to me, that's what recovery is about, is I want to continue to learn and grow. I haven't arrived. There's no magic destination, where your crusty neighbor, we'll call her, you know
He's
uh,
also one of the sweetest people I know.
I
So
believe
we
that,
are we are
yeah.
multitude.
Yes, yes, but I live in Arizona. I have a yard filled with rock, and we've had a lot of rain, so we have some weeds, and yeah, it is different. It is not no maintenance, and I can still kill plants even when they're, hardy and whatever. So yes, planning ahead for what could be coming, and you probably won't do it perfectly, and so there'll be a little bit of like, okay, we needed to adjust that, and that's what the journey's about. So great
Yeah,
topic. This is really good.
just one last word on the last thing you
Sure,
said there,
please.
Tammy. That's the resiliency mindset. Is perfection and perfectionism, I think, makes us brittle, not safe.
Yes.
So when I'm thinking over and done, never going to have to worry about that again, um, that's just not how things work. We had to replace our water main last spring, and we backfilled the trench. The trench was like 6 feet deep. It was a big job. So we backfilled the trench, and our plumber said leave about a 7 inch high mound of dirt on top, because when rains come and water hits this, it's going to settle and it's going to sink quite a bit. And so when I was scraping the front yard, I scraped this 7 inch mound because I'm like, it's been 6 months and it hasn't settled. Like, we're good. We're getting rain and snow here now, and guess who's got about a 6 inch trough in his front yard, because of that. So the resiliency mindset is, all of this is probably going to need some adjustment, because again, as I read the best of the information that's out there, as I listen to people, um, there's always special circumstances, or there's corners I cut, or there's things that I don't account for. And when I see the problem arising again, I can very quickly go to, oh, it's time for some more work, versus how do I cover this up because I don't want to deal with this.
Yes, and again, opportunities. But you also mentioned earlier, you wouldn't want to have to plan for every contingency. Like, you couldn't. Like, it's humanly impossible, and to the perfectionism. So okay, you thought, okay, enough time has gone by. Should be okay. Now you've got, well, go get that 7 inches or 6 inches of dirt now and put it back in. It's, you're going to adapt and work through it so that the next layer of the project is going to, have the best results you can have, in that moment, given what you've got. So, and since you're not a landscaper by trade, this is to be expected that this is, there's going to be a little bit of stuff. So, okay. My husband has a phone in bedroom and used just for alarm clock, but was playing game last night, which is what he swiped to when I caught him using porn. So it was triggering. We are 7 months in. He said he was okay. I was not. I think maybe a regular clock would be better as I would build trust. Um, I feel badly since he said he was okay.
I think did I recently talk about the difference between what it takes to get sober and the difference between what builds safety in our relationships? This falls right in line with that. So on this is the kind of stuff I see all the time. Couples want to fight about or make issues about in early recovery because um, each partner makes it about the thing that it's not. So, um, partner A saying, "Hey, if you're using a phone that you don't need to use, you must not be solid in your recovery. This is a sobriety issue," and they really kind of bypass their own dog in the fight. Or partner B says to partner A, um, you've always got your hands too far in my recovery. You need to leave me alone. My sobriety is my thing. If we look at it as what it takes to get sober is don't act out. Okay. So maybe you can get on a phone and not act out, and maybe that's fine. Given what the history has been, and your partner is triggered by that idea of you using a phone in the room, it's not a sobriety issue for you, it's a relationship issue for you. Your partner is saying, "This is hard on me. Um, what would it cost you to help them out?" Hey, you got it. I'm not worried about me, but that's not what this is about. This is about you coming in and seeing that. It took you back to D-Day. I don't want you to ever have to experience that again. I'm going out today. I'm going to buy one of those AM alarm clocks that you find in hotels that are always set to go off at 4 a.m. for some reason when I move into the hotel room.
Mhm.
Um, so there's ways to resolve this without getting hung up on is this okay? Is this safe? And you simply have to think in terms of what's impacting me more right now? Is this an active addiction or is this I've got a trigger? Both are very, very valid. And both deserve, I think, the best of the creativity and collaboration you two have to give.
Yeah, and I was thinking the same thing. I was like, first of all, an addict saying I'm okay, like that's lip service. It's what are my actions? My actions are showing you that I'm doing the same thing that I was doing before. I'm swiping on the phone.
Yeah, for those of you in addiction recovery, I'm okay is not going to buy you a lot of credit. In fact, it could set you back in the credit department. So just I'm okay is for you. It doesn't help your partner at all. What can I do to help you? Helps a lot
Y-
more.
Yeah. And you typed in, I think a regular clock would be better as I build trust. Um, and like it's his job to build the trust. He's the one that betrayed. So,
Well, I also here's the collaboration in
okay,
building the trust.
okay,
Partner who writes in here is saying, "Here's what I need
right. I
consider being
agree.
able to trust you in this department," which is an essential ingredient. And it's really, really
Yes,
hard for a lot of betrayed partners to do in these moments to speak up and say, "Here's what I need." You're doing that. Kudos to you.
yes.
Great job. Now, collaboration is your partner being able to hear that and saying, first, that's a yes or that's a no for me. If it's a
Mhm.
no, do keep in mind that you are taking the relationship in your own hands. It would be totally inbound for your partner at that point to say, "Then what am I doing with you if you're not willing to help me?" So I've made it clear there's a step I've asked you to take. Now you can either score a ton of points in the realm of trust by going out and getting that clock right now, or you can set things back and erode and deteriorate and harm things by dragging your feet and making this a power struggle. It doesn't have to be, and you're not losing anything by using a clock instead of a phone.
Well, so let's talk about because she's talking about, getting the clock. You're saying addict partner, go get the clock. I agree with you
Yes.
versus, I'm the
Yeah.
partner. I want you to use this. It
No.
can, go pick your favorite kind of clock. So,
I would put it this way, addict partner, you going to get the clock is such low hanging fruit to build trust. I heard you. You said this is real. You need it, and I'm on it. Um,
Yes.
Building trust is a long, hard process, but often the steps we take are not huge. It's just like that. Just like that.
You can order it from Amazon. It can be
Yeah.
delivered to your house.
You can
Yeah.
probably have it tonight.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Do you have any thoughts about chronic cheaters that did not have strong moral values because of their family of origin, did not, but fooled people with a mask like his family? This question has been coming up like a lot in
Mhm.
the same one in every webinar. So let's get your take on it. My husband did not have good values. He now is incorporating these values into his life. He has zero slips, relapses, and chosen to live a different life over 2 years. No problem changing from day one, and knows he has one chance or will lose his family if he slips. Can you speak to the choices to move towards good?
Yeah. I don't know if I've thought about this as values development before, but I think it is. When I'm working with couples and there's a relational issue that, partner A feels strongly about and partner B is, I could take it or leave it. I don't feel like my work is done until I've gotten partner B to find the personal stake they have in what partner A is asking. So for example, um, using porn. It's really easy to say this harms nobody else when you're the one using it. And it's really easy for a partner to say, this is huge harm to me. Um, Partner B, the person who's using porn, or the person who's cheating in this example, is going to have a more robust, resilient recovery when they develop values and they develop reasons why engaging that behavior would harm them again. So that's really, I think, what values are. Is it's a recognition of whether this is hard or not, whether it's pain up front or not. This is the right thing to do because it builds an easier path for me in the long run, builds an easier life for me in the long run. So the development of personal values, excuse me, I don't know why I'm coughing so much. The development of personal values and even shifting some values, being able to look at what was it that I believed in that allowed me to do this in the first place. And what's going to have to change about that is a really important part of getting some resiliency in your recovery. Sorry, I do come across people not infrequently that don't seem to struggle with slips or relapses. They can drop it just like that. Um, I think you were careful to say here chronic cheaters, not necessarily addicts. Um, Another way of saying this all is when you've cheated and you've broken the trust in a relationship, you have to get to the bottom of why you did it. You have to figure out and you have to be able to answer the question, why did you do this? Because if you can't, there is no way that your partner is going to be able to have any kind of potential security in the fact that you say, I'll never do it again. Because if you don't understand the mechanism for why it happened, you can't take appropriate remedial action. So in this case right here, values would be a really good place to go to put in place resiliency to that kind of lapse. Picking apart, what did I believe in the past that allowed me to do this, and how am I going to have to change that? I would say is an essential recovery or an essential ingredient for long-term recovery.
I have a quick question as a tag onto this. So like, I'm thinking like I'm wondering if, couples that have like a different value system are not having conversations at the beginning of the relationship to talk about those things. I mean, that's because otherwise, like you would know going into the relationship, these are kind of polar opposites, from what we're expecting.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things that I was saying to my associate therapist yesterday in supervision. I said, in relationship work, we can always expect that both sides of the equation are going to have some growing up and maturing to do. I said, I just don't think that functionally mature people, if they exist, I don't think they need relationship therapy.
Mhm.
Um, so there's a big part of that growing up. And early on in relationships, we do a lot of picking and choosing. Like we may pick our way through some really disturbing stuff to get to that little kernel that we really love at this person and ignore that it exists. And so I think those conversations about, what do you think about this, or what would you do in this type of situation, or I mean, you can talk about stories in the news in the same light. What do you think about this? They're absolutely essential to have because that's how you get an idea of one another's values, character, what's important to them. And you don't have to have 100% congruence in values, but they have to be directionally aligned enough that there can be confidence and safety that when it comes to a conflict of values, we're not going to be pulling in opposite directions. We might have to trim our sails a little bit so that we can move smoothly. But generally, if your values are going to point you in opposite directions, you're not going to have a real. There's not going to be a lot of. There's not going to be a lot of chance for collaboration and working together and understanding each other there.
Okay, thanks. Um, is edging truly worse than relapse? Edging is as in skirting the edge of relapse, indulging in problematic behavior without it being a full-on relapse.
Yeah, what is full-on relapse? Now, I'm thinking from a neurological standpoint, and this is part of the justification behind edging, which totally discounts how our brains and memory networks work. So, bedrock neurological principle, what fires together wires together. This is part of what we're talking about in latency. So these behaviors, these emotions, these sensations, these locations, they're all part of that relapse cycle. And we actually don't have thought control. So what the edger may say to justify is, well, I'm not getting to orgasm, or I'm not really thinking explicitly about stuff. I'm just doing it. Whether you're thinking it explicitly or consciously or not, that groove, you could say in your brain, that neural network is being rehearsed again. Every time the neural network is rehearsed, it is solidified. One thing we do know about addiction for sure is we see this in studies of problematic gamblers. They don't need a win to feel like it's a win for their brain to register reward. It just has to get close enough. We call it the near miss phenomenon. Um, so I don't know about truly worse or not. I don't know that's how I would gauge it. I would say edging isn't doing you any favors if what you're trying to do is break up with this neural pathway. Like you got to rest the whole thing. And, like when it comes to sex or food or, things that people can struggle with addictively that are uh, parts of life, you really have to work on the rerouting of the neural network. So edging is not working on the rerouting. Edging is saying, I'll take it up to this point and then I'm stopping, and that way I'm technically sober. And your 12-step fellowship may say, here's our definition of sobriety. And then you get all sorts of people who are suddenly the world's most brilliant attorneys who can split hairs on definitions and technically I'm this or that. I would say if internally or externally your conversation is, well, technically this or that, I think you're missing the whole point. It's not whether you're adhering to some strict definition of sobriety. It's what are you doing with this part of you? What are you doing with this tendency? Are you trying to bend it for good? Or are you just trying to not fall in? Because that's a pretty dangerous game.
I was thinking that too. It's what is the goal, And with 12 step, we talk about half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go. Yeah, absolutely. So if we're trying to hang on to all of that stuff, and it identifies indulging in problematic behavior, like it's in the description. So like if the goal is to hang on to problematic behaviors, then stay in active addiction. Like if you're looking to do life differently, it, I can't say it often enough and heartily enough. All in on recovery gives you just an amazingly different life. It doesn't make it all perfect, but wow, you have the chance to do life completely differently. But if you're hanging on to all of this stuff, you're not really in recovery. You're not really. I think it's honestly the worst place to be is like, like I'm not really acting out, but I'm not really in recovery. It's you're like you're in the absolute worst place you can possibly be because you're not getting all of the benefits of recovery, but you're not fully engaging in the acting out either. So, For individuals not suffering from addiction but has had patterns of cheating, do you believe they have a high chance of going back to cheating patterns, given that they do the work to repair and heal? Does this confirm the once a cheater, always a cheater?
Um, Maybe. Here's what I would say about that. And this is kind of what I was talking about before with neural
Mhm,
networks and
mhm.
learning. Once you complete a loop, once you do a thing, it's easier to do it again. So I wouldn't think in terms of high probability. I would think in terms of any probability. So like for example, when I speed in my car, um, is there an increased probability that I get in an accident or I cause an accident? The faster I go, is there more of a probability that somebody dies? Absolutely. What exactly is that probability? I don't care because I don't even want to get close to it. So I don't speed in my car. And if someone is driving recklessly around me on the freeway, I slow way, way down and I let them get way, way up there. I'm not even going to mess with that. So I think it's less about how likely is it that this is going to happen, and it's more about should this happen again, what are the consequences? So in that way, I don't know that I would necessarily say once a cheater, always a cheater. I think that that may not be a helpful view for the person recovering, nor the person who wants to be with them in a relationship. I think saying more like, uh, once I've done this, it's easier to do it again, and I can't ever be non-vigilant. I can't relax around this. Again, for a lot of folks who cheat, there is this automaticity. There's this lack of frontal lobe engagement. I just kind of fell into the behavior pattern again, or I fell into the pattern and the current took me, which is not an excuse. Again, it's more what you have to be aware of. So again, it's about bending that neural network. So, take for example the person who had cheated with coworkers. I think there are very few professions in the world where you're not going to deal with the opposite sex or someone you could be potentially attracted to. So you got to work that. You got to be aware. It was easy for me to do once. I've done it before. If I'm not aware of this interaction, I'm not bending it in a different direction. I worked with a man a while ago who slept with a lot of his coworkers. And he switched jobs, and his policy with coworkers is we don't text our business. We will text in the group, in the context of the group, but I don't text people one on one anymore, male or female. I just don't do it. And I think he would be someone who would say for a decade now, I don't want to go back to that. I'm not planning to go back to that. But he's understanding it's really easy for this to get out of hand. And no matter how good I feel, I don't even want to mess with the probability that something like this could happen.
Yeah, and you talked about practicing or the repeat patterns. It's like when we want to practice healthy behaviors, why practicing them frequently starts to make that neural pathway the go-to instead of the other neural
Yep.
pathway. Okay. Hi, addict partner here. Your talk resonated with me, and I can see the way the issues are cyclical. This makes me think of the cycle of abuse. Anyway, I was wondering how you recommend bringing more awareness to the different parts of the cycle so that it can be caught earlier. Are there particular techniques you recommend to find most helpful? I like your story about the therapist telling you it's not sane. Not all therapists are that direct in my experience, and that is true.
No, I got lucky. Fun thing about Jim,
Yes.
my therapist, he had long gray hair that he always had back in a scrunchie, and his scrunchie always coordinated with the socks that he wore, and I think that gave him unbelievable confidence. So he could be very direct with me. I'm just joking. He was a good
No,
therapist.
that's a good thing. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so some things that can make it aware, like writing out your cycle, actually mapping it out and revisiting that over and over and over again, especially as you learn more about yourself, you learn more about ancillary issues to addiction. This is what first step, fourth step type stuff is all about. Um, so I think that kind of stuff, I mean, you just have to rehearse it. You have to put it up in front of your eyes. And I think talking to other people who share maybe a same or a similar acting out behavior, as you swap stories and you learn from each other, you may hear things that you didn't realize were a significant part of your story. Um, that when you listen to others, you may say, actually, that is a part of my cycle. Now to hear you say it, I can totally see that, and I missed it before. So you add it to the list, you add it to the awareness again, not so that you can be this hyper aware, I'm going to control everything, but more just I know the really most important places to pay attention, and overall, I'm not expecting that this goes in the rearview mirror. I never have to deal with it again, so I can stay appropriately vigilant. I'm not going to be surprised if something's coming up in me that's pushing me in that direction. I can expect that, and I can do something about it early on.
Well, you know, and I think, well, I know addicts are very compartmentalized. And so it's really easy for us to go, I'm good, and not have the awareness. One of the things I had to work really hard on was being aware of what's going on in my body because I would ignore all of the warning signs. And so now if I start to go, oh, my gut's clenching, oh, my shoulders,
Mm-hmm.
well, I pay attention to that, and then I can go, what's really going on? You know,
Mm-hmm.
so starting to have that intentionality about being aware of everything and not going, I'm good, you know, the pat answer, I'm fine, is another starting point. But that's part, you know, can be part of your cycle too. Okay, family definitely wore a mask, so Christian values all the while cheating. Oh, this goes back to the other one. Okay. Same person, only knew what they let me in on. And then, oh, I don't know if we've got time. Should sex be avoided for a period of time during recovery? My partner is able to be more present during sex now, and it feels like connecting experience. It is no longer feel like he's playing out porn scenes. He is very giving, attentive, focusing on my pleasure. At first, I want to have sex with him, but afterwards, I worry I'm hindering his recovery by giving him a release.
So two things there. I'll just really quick. The first part: should sex be avoided for a period of time during recovery? Yeah, I do think so. Think about it like a vacation. You take a vacation, you get out of the normal realm of things. You focus on some integrative stuff. You come back with new eyes. You come back with a new take on things. And it's always good to remind yourself as a sex addict, I don't need this to live. And it's good to prove that. The other part about the guilt, um, this again is where I think it's really, really important to not just turn off the lights and do things in the bedroom, but turn them on afterward, look at each other and talk about it. What was that like for you? What's happening? Let me tell you what came up for me. Sex is not just about the performance. It's about here's the core of my soul, there's the core of your soul. We're sharing that metaphorically, literally, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, all of it. So that's the short answer to that.
Great. Thank you. And we're off to the next meeting. So thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.